How many of you read Sidney Sheldon's Rage of Angels? Yeah? The chief protagonist in that story was a lady, beautiful lady called Jennifer Parker. And in the beginning, Jennifer Parker was an assistant district attorney, and she'd been trying to get this guy. It was a particular case she was doing. And the person that she was trying to help had been tortured very badly. And they had tortured certain parts of his anatomy, which shall remain nameless because there are children in the audience. But they had used something like a nutcracker, and they'd used different kinds of instruments. She had them all in a box. And the opposing counsel managed to prevent her from putting this in front of as evidence. So they had gone in front of the judge. The judge said, I'm sorry, the counsel's point is valid. So she was walking back to her table, and then she accidentally tripped. And the box fell, and all the instruments fell out. So she leaned down and slowly, one by one, put them back in the box. And of course, the jury saw. And of course, she won the case. I knew there and then from watching that movie, I was going to be Jennifer Parker. But I hadn't counted high school. Now, when I was in Consolata, I went to Consolata Primary School, and I was in the top 10 percentile. So by that, I mean the people who I meet were also in the top 10 percentile, who actually tell me what my index number was. I don't remember. All I know is I was in the top 10 percentile. So by the time I was getting to high school, I knew, I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna do it. But high school had a whole different other plan for me. And today, we send our children to counseling. Those days, our parents gave us a good talking to. Boarding school was just not for me. And the person who made it extremely real was a lady called Mrs. Okello. I moved from being in the top 10 percentile in primary school to being in the bottom 20th percentile in high school. By Form 1, my first term, I was number 150 out of 170. Now, that was a shock to the system. And Mrs. Okello, God bless her cotton socks, 6 foot tall, pale complexion, because she had a Slavic background. She was from Russia. Narrow eyes, slightly tilting towards the end. She had a little mole above her lip. She had her hair cut really short to the scalp. It would be between brown or red, depending on what blood was coursing through her Russian veins. But the most distinct part of Mrs. Okello's features were her tongue. You know how they say the pen is mightier than the sword? Mrs. Okello's tongue was mightier than the pen, that's mightier than the sword. And she was our math teacher. And how she ended up in Kenya, this was the rumor. You know how high school is full of rumors. So I went to, first of all, maybe I should put the context. I went to Kenya High School, known as Boma. And she ended up as a math teacher because apparently she was in school in Mother Russia. Her husband, who was a Kenyan, came. They met in university. They came back home after they got married. She had studied apparently as a nuclear physicist. And since the only thing close to nuclear in Kenya you can get is the Oxford Dictionary, she ended up as a mathematics teacher. And mathematics came as easily to her as 791 million shillings comes to a hairdresser and a bank driver. So she was amazing. But the day that she defined or tried to define me was, she used to give out the tests. This was in first form. And there was a ubiquitous weekly mathematics test. And by this time I knew I was thick as 2 planks. And she used to give them out. And I remember that day, like it was yesterday, the ambient temperature must have been about 26 degrees centigrade, southeasterly winds of about 50 kilometers per hour. I know this because I was usually last, and she used to give them out according to who had done well. So we were about 40 in the class. I was usually number 30, 31. So I used to sit back and just look at the sun as I'm waiting for my name to be called out. But this lady had an enormous sense of drama. And by the time she was getting to the 30th paper, her hand paused in the air just for a slight second. Then her lip curled into a little sneer. And she looked up and she said, "Carolina, beauty without brains." It's actually not that funny, because those 4 words stuck with me for a long time. They were seared in my mind. And maybe let me put things into context if you're wondering why she called me that. I was in Boma, and this was first form. And first form, first term is the most foolish, non-academic distraction known to man called Miss Boma. And the fourth formers had seen this brown girl with long hair and said, this one is going to be our candidate. And they pumped me in there. And so I went in to do that damn competition, the way you go to do your driving license, hoping for the best but expecting the worst. But my dreams were valid and I won. I know I don't look beautiful anymore. It's 30 odd years later, I get it. So winning that contest, then defined who I was to her. I was this little scatterbrain girl who was taking part in beauty pageants instead of paying attention to math. And for the next 3 years, because karma is a 5-letter unprintable word, and most people would shift math teachers, but karma ensured that I was with her for the 4 years that I was in high school. And so I never ever got to enjoy or experience another math teacher who might have seen the potential in me, because I sure saw the potential in me. But that defined what she saw of me, and as a result, I reflected what she saw, which was somebody who was thick as 2 planks, and I never ever succeeded in math. But come fourth form, I realized that I wanted to be who? Jennifer Parker. And I was like, I need to get into law school. So you sit down. By the time those of us who've been to fourth form, you start doing the mathematics, all right? And you start seeing, all I need is a B in math, an A in English. So I knew English, history, no problem. Math is where I couldn't crack it. So I had a wonderful man called Mr. Keru who gave me tuition. And through the grace of God and Mr. Keru, I passed. And as luck would have it, I ended up being in the banking industry and in finance and in consulting, and I've used mathematics all my life thereafter, but I hate the damn subject. Because you can't tell me any of you here who have used a quadratic equation since you left high school. Have you? No, you're lying. Have you used trigonometry? Kefi, cosine, sine, tangent? No, you've not. You're lying through your teeth. And don't even tell me about vectors, okay, and magnification, because when you go to Nakumat and you ask the guy, Chumbi, ko wapi, he's not going to say, magnify your vector, namda hii, ko aisle number, absolute hogwash. You'd think that now that I've pretty much succeeded in life, I worked in the banking industry for 10 years, I've been running my own consultancy for 8 years, I'm not doing too badly. You'd think that when I see Mrs. Okela, I want to give her a piece of my mind, right? Right? Would you? No? No, because my dreams are valid. So I did. I saw her about 4 years ago. How many of you know Kasuku Center? Yeah, in Kileleshwa. I was coming out of the greengrocer, and she was coming out of the supermarket. And in that split second, I fled. That split second, she reduced me to a 15-year-old snot-nosed brat. All the fears came back. And as I was driving off, I was like, you silly girl, you foolish girl, what are you doing? But I was actually afraid that if I looked her dead in the eye, she would say, Carolina, still no brains, beauty gone. It's been 30 years, and I almost let this lady write my narrative. And when all is said and done, never underestimate the power of someone to try and write your narrative. And you've got to be very careful about that, because then you're giving them the power. And I'm just glad that somewhere in Form 4, around about February, I woke up and said, I just need to crack math. And Mr. Keru helped me crack it. So never underestimate the power of someone. And that someone can be your parent, that someone can be your sibling, that someone can be your boss, that someone can be your spouse. But you must also remember that they're also projecting their fears and their expectations on you. When they say you'll never be anything, you'll never amount to anything, or you're the best teacher ever, they're projecting towards you, and you need to learn to separate that. Maya Angelou said, and you all know Maya Angelou, famous black writer, and she said that I've learned that people forget what you say, people forget what you did, but people never forget how you made them feel. I've never forgotten how Mrs. Okello made me feel. And so I've always said to myself, I'll never let somebody else write my narrative. I will write my own narrative. And when I die, the only thing I want, when all is said and done, on my tombstone was, she laughed loud, she laughed long, and she laughed often. Thank you.